Something unusual, almost shocking, unfolded behind the scenes at Joyce Meyer Ministries in 2025. After more than 2 decades on daytime TV, Joyce Meyer, one of the most recognized faces in Christian broadcasting, suddenly disappeared from the network. Officially, the reason was never made public, leaving fans confused and speculating. But leaked documents and insider whispers hinted a far more complex and troubling story. This wasn't just about programming decisions or a shift in audience demographics this time. It involved serious allegations that threatened to shake the foundation of her ministry. For Joyce, the pause was more than a professional setback, it was personal. Her empire, built meticulously over decades, now faced a period of uncertainty. Ratings plummeted, staff scrambled to adapt, and the public began asking questions that had no clear answers. Observers began to wonder if this marked the beginning of an era where the woman who had turned faith into a global platform would be tested like never before. From a $100 million ministry to a network conflict that could alter her legacy, Joyce Meyer suddenly stood at a crossroads. Born Pauline Joyce Hutcherson on June 4, 1943, in South St. Louis, her early life was overshadowed by turmoil, the world wide war. Her father was drafted the day she was born, and the absence of a stable parental figure would shape the contours of her childhood. When he finally returned 3 years later, the man who walked back into her home was changed, hardened by combat, and steeped in bitterness. Alcohol, anger, and control filled the house. Money was tight, tension hung thick in every room, and a young Joyce absorbed it all silently. Her early years were marked by fear and confusion, lessons that life would teach brutally. The streets of South St. Louis might have seemed steady and familiar, but inside her home, the ground beneath her feet shifted constantly. Each passing year layered trauma upon trauma. She learned early that protection and comfort might never come, and yet, even amid that darkness, the first flicker of light appeared, a light that would eventually guide her toward faith, survival, and a ministry that touched millions worldwide. Joyce Meyer's childhood was defined by fear and silence. By the time she was 5, her father's controlling behavior escalated into abuse. Small mistakes were punished harshly, and the isolation she experienced at home became a constant shadow. While other children played freely in the streets of South St. Louis, Joyce lived in a house where the walls seemed to absorb her cries, leaving her with only her thoughts and a growing sense of helplessness. Her mother, worn down by years of her husband's cruelty, remained silent. That silence, meant to protect, instead deepened Joyce's feeling of abandonment. By the age of 7, the absence of emotional support left Joyce carrying the weight of her trauma alone. She learned quickly that asking for help could be futile and dangerous. Each day was a careful negotiation: speak too loudly, act freely, and the consequences could be unbearable. Even as she experienced extreme hardship, a part of her began to seek solace outside her home. That solace first came in the form of a small, weathered Bible she discovered at age 9, 1950, to mark a subtle yet powerful turning point. In a quiet classroom in South St. Louis, Joyce opened the Bible on her own, reading the words of love, hope, and forgiveness for the first time. She felt a glimmer of a world beyond the suffocating control of her household. The scriptures seemed like gentle hands reaching into her life, whispering that there could be more than pain and fear. This spark of faith, fragile as it was, became her first anchor. She became a born-again Christian around this time, hoping that her faith could somehow change the darkness at home. But when she returned from church, the abuse did not stop. The physical and emotional torment continued weekly for nearly a decade, creating scars that were invisible to the world. From age 10 to 18, she endured over 100 incidents of abuse, meticulously concealed behind the weight of a seemingly ordinary home. Fear of manipulation kept her silent, and the outside world remained oblivious to her suffering. Despite the relentless trauma, Joyce clung to the small light her faith offered. The Bible was her companion, her refuge, and her first teacher. Resilience, each passage she read, each prayer whispered in secret, laid the foundation for a remarkable inner strength. That strength, forged in the crucible of pain, would eventually become the driving force behind her ministry. It was in those early, lonely years that Joyce Meyer began to understand a profound truth. Even in the darkest places, hope could take root, and the courage to survive could bloom. At 18, Joyce Meyer finally stepped out of the house that had been both a prison and a classroom in pain. The memories were raw, the fear lingered, and the emotional scars ran deep. But for the first time, she had a chance at freedom, no matter how fragile. With little money and almost no support, she entered the world determined to survive. Her first job was as a secretary at a local insurance office, a modest position that offered financial stability but little security for her wounded heart. Even outside the house, fear and mistrust stayed close. Years of manipulation and abuse had left her hyper-aware of danger and constantly second-guessing herself. Joyce's first marriage came quickly, driven by a desire to find safety and love, but instead of comfort, she encountered betrayal. Her husband, whom she later called a con artist, lied, cheated, and abandoned her on more than one occasion, once leaving her stranded in California with nothing but a dime and a carton of soda bottles. The marriage lasted 5 difficult years, ending in 1966, and left her bitter, wounded, and cautious of trusting again. Her return to her parents' home brought back old memories she had hoped to leave behind. Yet life forced her into a second marriage. She sought stability, but instead, emotional turbulence continued to follow her. By 1965, at only 22, she had her first child, Laura. The tiny apartment The full-time bank teller job and the responsibilities of motherhood pressed on her every day. Depression and anxiety crept in, mixing with the old traumas that had never fully healed. Life felt heavy. Each day a struggle to simply breathe under the weight of her past and present burdens. Yet even amid this storm, Joyce did not give up entirely on faith. Counseling offered glimpses of relief, though it never reached the deepest roots of her pain still. She began to take small steps toward healing, finding strength in prayer, scripture, and quiet reflection. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a vision began to emerge, an idea that she could take her experiences, her lessons in survival, and turn them into guidance for others. The seed of ministry was planted in these early years, nourished by the desire to help those who suffered in silence. Just as she once had, her journey from trauma to independence was not immediate, nor was it easy. Every setback, betrayal, and emotional wound added layers of resilience. Shaping a woman who would one day reach millions, Joyce Meyer's early adulthood was a crucible, testing her faith, courage, and determination, and it was in this crucible that she discovered the first glimmers of her true calling to teach, to heal, and to connect with others who carried burdens hidden from the world. By 1976, Joyce Meyer was 33, carrying years of pain, betrayal, and survival in her heart. Each day, she navigated the complexities of life, work, and family. Yet something inside her yearned for more than survival. Then, one early morning, as she drove to work, exhausted and frustrated, an extraordinary moment occurred, a moment she would describe as life-changing. She later recalled hearing her name called 3 times, clear, intimate, and unmistakable, filling her car with a presence so profound it shook her to her core. This was no ordinary prayer. Joyce, who had been a Christian since childhood, felt a spiritual clarity unlike anything she had experienced before. The voice seemed to reach into the parts of her life she had long kept silent about, stirring a deep awakening. That day, something inside her shifted. Her faith was no longer just a quiet comfort. It became a force demanding action, honesty, and outreach. She went home that evening with a renewed sense of purpose, feeling as if the presence she experienced had settled into her very bones, guiding her next steps. Joyce's first actions were humble, yet deliberate. She gathered a small group of co-workers during lunch breaks and began studying the Bible together. She leaned on a Thompson Chain Reference Bible, exploring John 1:1 and the foundational text of her faith. Her teaching was honest, personal, and relatable, sharing struggles she herself had endured. Initially, her audience was only 25 to 30 people, but her authenticity resonated. Week by week, the group grew, with attendees returning through rain or shine, drawn by her vulnerability and practical wisdom. By the early 1980s, Joyce and her husband had joined Life Christian Center in Fenton, Missouri, a modest church with only about 30 members. She began a women's Bible study in her home, expecting a handful of attendees, but 115 women showed up to the first meeting. Word spread quickly, and soon the weekly study swelled to 500 participants. Pastor Rick Shelton recognized her energy and invited her to speak on Sundays. Her testimony raw, unflinching, and deeply human touched lives. People were drawn to someone who had endured extreme suffering yet found hope and strength in faith. In 1980, Joyce was ordained as an associate pastor, a remarkable achievement for a woman in that era. She started counseling individuals carrying the same hidden wounds she had once borne. A 15-minute radio segment on emotional healing through Scripture soon followed, planting the seeds for something much larger. Her voice was a lifeline for those struggling with fear, shame, and trauma, offering validation and hope in ways that had rarely been heard on air. It was the beginning of Joyce Meyer Ministries, a ministry built on honesty, healing, and connection with the brokenhearted. By 1983, at the age of 40, Joyce Meyer took a bold step. She launched her own radio program, Life in the Word, initially airing on a single station in St. Louis. The show quickly gained traction because of her candid approach. Joyce didn't shy away from sharing the pain she had endured. She spoke about abuse, fear, shame, and depression with a sincerity that resonated with listeners. In those 15-minute broadcasts, people heard not just teaching, but real life, survival, and many felt seen for the first time in their struggles. Within 2 years, the program was on 6 stations across the Midwest, reaching cities like Chicago and Kansas City. Her honesty, however, invited scrutiny. Local religious leaders criticized her focus on prosperity, claiming it made faith appear materialistic. Newspapers questioned whether her teachings can mislead vulnerable followers. Yet Joyce remained steadfast. She believed that confronting fear and trauma openly offered a path to healing, and her listeners agreed. Letters poured in by the hundreds each week, people sharing their struggles, asking for guidance, or simply expressing gratitude for feeling understood. Joyce recognized that the connection she fostered was more than instruction, it was lifeline, support for countless lives. By 1985, the demand had grown too large for her to manage while still serving as an associate pastor. She officially founded Life in the Word as an independent nonprofit ministry, operating initially from her home with an annual budget of around $50,000, funded entirely by listeners. Her husband, Dave, joined as business manager, and together, they built a small but dedicated team, handling counseling requests, tape orders, and correspondence. In 1986, the ministry gained tax-exempt status, formalizing what had begun as a deeply personal mission into an organized foundation for outreach. The release of her Battlefield of the Mind radio series marked a turning point. Joyce addressed internal struggles often left unspoken, depression, fear, traumatic memories, and sleepless nights. Listeners connected immediately. Over 10,000 cassette tapes were sold in 1986 alone, many describing them as life-changing. The series later became a best-selling book, cementing her influence and proving the universal appeal of honest, relatable spiritual teaching. By the mid-1980s, criticism followed her success, with skeptics questioning her prosperity teaching and high ministry income. Joyce responded by increasing transparency, creating oversight, and showing that the majority of funds were dedicated to outreach and charity work. Television beckoned in 1993 with the launch of Enjoying Everyday Life on WGN-TV and BET. From a modest 30-minute local show, her program expanded to reach over 1 million viewers monthly. Later broadcasting in 20 countries by 1997, Joyce's willingness to share personal details, divorces, betrayals, and struggles connected with audiences worldwide. Her ministry grew further with the creation of a $20 million headquarters in Fenton, Missouri, capable of producing over 300 episodes annually. Through the 2000s, her work extended beyond teaching. The St. Louis Dream Center offered aid to trauma survivors, the homeless, and those battling addiction. She partnered with their International Justice Mission to fight human trafficking, funding rescues, legal support, and safe houses for victims. Joyce's ministry also quietly supported adoptions for abused children, ensuring they had a chance at new beginnings, yet public scrutiny never ceased. Critics highlighted salaries, luxury spending, and other controversies. Investigations, audits, and Senate inquiries challenged her transparency. Joyce met each challenge with accountability reforms, strengthening oversight and emphasizing charitable work. Even in 2025, when she departed Dare TV due to serious allegations against the network, she took a stand, shifting her broadcast to TBN, Lifetime, and UU. Her audience adjusted, digital engagement grew, and her teaching reached over 500,000 viewers daily. Today, Joyce Meyer's story is one of triumph over adversity, honesty and faith, and an unyielding commitment to healing others from a childhood of abuse and isolation to the creation of a global ministry. She has consistently transformed personal trauma into lessons of hope, resilience, and courage. Her journey reminds the world that even the deepest wounds can inspire profound impact, and even in moments of controversy, integrity and faith can guide the way.